Close your eyes for a moment and picture this, the medieval countryside in the dead of winter. The sun has long since disappeared, leaving only a pale silver glow across the fields. The earth is silent beneath its frozen shell. The branches of bare trees creak in the wind, and smoke rises lazily from the humble chimneys of peasant homes scattered like dark shadows across the snow. Tonight, we are stepping back in time to enter one of those small homes, to feel, hear, and imagine what it truly meant to face winter as a medieval peasant. It was a season not of cozy festivities or picturesque snowfalls, but of endurance. Survival was the quiet miracle of every cold dawn. And as we explore the details of their lives, you may find the rhythm of their struggle strangely soothing, a reminder of how humanity has always fought to keep warm against the dark. For the average peasant, home was not a sturdy stone cottage with glowing windows. It was a fragile hut built from what could be found nearby, woven sticks coated with mud, straw, and often animal dung. This simple mixture formed the walls of their shelter, what historians call wattle and daub. The structure was functional but far from airtight. In truth, the cold and the wind seemed almost invited inside, slipping through every gap, whistling across the dirt floor, reminding the family that walls were more suggestion than barrier. The roof, usually thatched with bundles of reeds or straw, sagged under the weight of snow and rain. Sometimes it leaked, dripping steadily into bowls or onto sleeping children. Sometimes it let in visitors of another kind, a bird, a mouse, even the occasional squirrel tumbling uninvited through the rafters. Windows, if they existed at all, were little more than narrow openings covered with wooden shutters or scraps of animal hide. Glass was a luxury reserved for castles and churches, not for those who worked the soil. And yet, within these humble walls, families endured. They patched cracks with moss, stuffed gaps with old rags, and reinforced the outside with another coating of mud when winter demanded it. To us, such a place might seem unbearably harsh. To them, it was home, the fragile shell that stood between survival and exposure. While the wind lashed at walls and roof, another enemy crept silently from below, the frozen earth. Medieval peasants did not have raised wooden floors or carpets. The ground beneath their feet was simply compacted dirt. When snow fell, when rains came, water seeped inside, turning the floor into mud, then ice. To fight back, families spread rushes or straw across the floor. For a while, this gave the illusion of warmth, and perhaps even a little softness underfoot. But the straw quickly flattened, grew damp, and rotted. Layer upon layer would be spread through the months, forming a strange, living carpet of decomposing plants, insects, and dust. It was unpleasant, but it was better than lying directly on the frozen soil. Beds were little more than sacks filled with hay, or a wooden frame piled with straw. There were no thick mattresses, no quilts or cushions. Instead, sleep came with the sound of crunching stalks and the sharp poke of stems against skin. Fleas and lice made their homes there too, and scratching was often as constant as breathing. Still, the straw created just enough insulation to keep the deadly chill from seeping entirely into the body. It was not comfort, but it was survival. In the very center of the home, one thing mattered above all: the fire. Without it, the night was unbearable. With it, there was at least a small circle of warmth, a flicker of light, and the smell of smoke rising toward the thatched roof. Most peasant homes did not have chimneys in the early Middle Ages. Smoke lingered heavily in the air, stinging the eyes, clinging to clothes and blackening the rafters. To us, it would feel suffocating. But in its way, the smoke offered its own protection, driving away insects and pests, even slowing the decay of wooden beams. Keeping the fire alive was a sacred duty. Before sleeping, embers were carefully banked beneath layers of ash, coaxed into slumber rather than death. Done correctly, the fire would still glow faintly by morning, ready to be awakened with a few twigs and a patient breath. Done poorly, the family awoke to a cold, dead hearth and the painful task of sparking flame from flint and steel, often with fingers too numb to work well. Around the fire, people gathered not only for warmth, but for companionship. Here, stories were told, prayers whispered, and the quiet monotony of winter nights passed in the glow of flickering light. The hearth was kitchen, heater, and social center, the fragile heart of the home. In an age before central heating, warmth was not just a matter of fire or clothing, it was a matter of people. Families learned quickly that the best insulation was one another. Parents, children, grandparents, sometimes even neighbors, and livestock, all might share the same bedding on bitter nights. Privacy was unknown. Instead, survival demanded closeness. Infants and the elderly were placed in the center of the group, where body heat radiated strongest. The stronger and more robust slept along the edges, acting as human shields against drafts. Animals often joined as well. A goat, a cow, or chickens huddled nearby, their warm bodies adding a few more degrees of life-saving heat. The result was noisy, crowded, and often smelly. But to those within, it was warmth, it was safety. And when the wind howled against the walls and the fire sank low, it was the difference between waking and never waking at all. Clothing for winter was not fashionable or varied, it was practical. Linen shirts formed the base layer, scratchy against the skin but necessary. Over them came woolen tunics, cloaks, leggings, and if fortune smiled, a sheepskin or fur. Feet were wrapped in cloth and stuffed into wooden clogs. Gloves and hats were precious treasures. Bathing was rare in the cold months, and laundry rarer still. Clothes stiffened with sweat, dirt, and smoke, but this grime provided an unexpected advantage: insulation. The thicker the layers of grease and dirt, the more they blocked out biting winds. It was unpleasant, but it worked. Children were bundled into as many layers as possible, waddling like stuffed turnips. Adults carried the same look, lumpy and awkward, but grateful for each scrap of warmth. It was not elegance, but endurance. In medieval winters, every stitch of fabric was armor in the war against the cold. Food was another weapon in this battle. A heavy meal before sleep acted like fuel, burning within the body through the long hours of the night. Stews of root vegetables, grains boiled into porridge, coarse bread, or on lucky nights, a bit of salted meat. These were not luxuries, they were life. Parents insisted that even the pickiest child eat. Hunger was dangerous, but worse still was the cold that followed an empty stomach. And so the evening meal became a ritual of protection, a way of storing heat inside when blankets and walls could not provide enough. Finally, there was faith. When resources were exhausted, when fires were low and the winds merciless, peasants turned to prayer. They asked for protection from saints, sprinkled holy water near the hearth, or traced blessings on doors and windows. Even small superstitions, a charm hung near the bed, a whispered promise, offered comfort. Faith did not banish the cold, but it gave meaning to the struggle. It reminded them that survival was not just about flesh and bone, but spirit, hope, and the belief that spring would come again. This was the world of medieval peasants in winter, fragile huts of mud and straw, fires guarded like treasures, bodies pressed together for warmth, meals eaten not for pleasure, but for endurance, and prayers rising into smoky rafters. Every night was a test, every dawn a quiet triumph. As you rest tonight, think of them. those nameless men, women, and children whose resilience carried them through winters harsher than most of us can imagine. Their struggle is distant, yet strangely familiar, a reminder of the lengths to which humanity will go to find warmth in the dark. For all the clever tricks of sealing walls and layering clothes, the fire remained the ultimate guardian of life. Yet it was fickle, fragile, always on the edge of disappearing. In many households, family members took turns through the night, tending to the hearth. Parents roused children when they were old enough to carry a stick of wood. Grandparents, though stiff in their bones, often lingered by the flames, their eyes watching embers that glowed faintly beneath mounds of ash. Letting the fire die was more than inconvenience. It was peril. A cold hearth meant not just freezing air, but wasted hours trying to coax new sparks from flint and steel. In the dead of night, with icy winds rattling shutters and frost creeping across straw bedding, failure could be fatal. And so, fire was tended like a newborn, carefully, constantly, with devotion. The technique of banking the fire, covering hot embers with ash before sleep, was passed down like a family recipe. Each household had its variation, its secrets. One family swore by dry ash, another by damp. Some packed coals tightly, others let them breathe. It was knowledge refined not by books but by survival, tested night after night across generations. Even with a hearth glowing, the cold never surrendered completely. It prowled the room, slipping through unseen cracks, dropping from sagging thatch, rising through the earthen floor. Families fought it as best they could. Moss was pressed into wall gaps, rags stuffed beneath doors, holes in the roof were patched with reeds, turf, or whatever scrap could be scavenged. It was a never-ending game of discovery. Seal one draft, another appeared. A sudden gust could rattle the entire structure, sending a chill straight through a sleeping child. Some nights the effort felt hopeless, and yet the work was done diligently. Every stuffed hole, every patched leak was one more act of defiance against the season's cruelty. If the roof sagged, someone climbed atop to beat snow away with a stick. If the shutters trembled, stones were stacked against them. No effort was wasted. In this way, peasants carried out an invisible war against winter, not glorious, not dramatic, but quiet, stubborn, and relentless. For many families, warmth came not only from one another, but from the animals that shared their homes. Livestock, cows, goats, pigs, and chickens were not kept in separate barns. Instead, they often lived under the same roof. The arrangement was noisy, dirty, and undeniably pungent, but it was practical. A cow lying against a wall radiated as much warmth as a small hearth. Goats curled in corners provided both body heat and protection from theft. Chickens roosting above contributed not only eggs, but a little extra insulation, their feathers ruffling in the smoky gloom. The mingling of people and animals blurred the line between household and barn. By modern standards, it would seem intolerable, but for the peasant, it was sensible, natural, even comforting. The soft lowing of a cow at night, the quiet breathing of pigs, the restless cluck of hens. These were the sounds of survival. Each creature was another beating heart against the cold. Sleep itself was never deep or uninterrupted. With animals to mind, fires to tend, and drafts to patch, rest came in fragments. Families learned to sleep in shifts. Some lay down while others kept watch, stirring embers or listening for dangers outside. There was no concept of sleeping 8 peaceful hours. Instead, there were snatches of rest broken by duty. Parents nudged children awake not to play, but to hold a torch, fetch straw, or shoo an animal from the hearth. The line between wakefulness and slumber blurred. And yet, This rhythm became normal. It shaped lives into a constant cycle of vigilance and fatigue. Even children grew up knowing that warmth was communal labor, not a given. Rest was something earned, protected, and rarely complete. In the still, cold air of night, even breathing became a calculated act. Deep gulps of icy air risked illness, while shallow breaths drawn slowly through the nose gave the body a chance to warm each inhalation. Parents taught children not to pant indoors, not to open their mouths wide against the chill. Some wrapped cloth across their faces as they slept, creating a small barrier against the freezing drafts. In the morning, the fabric was damp, stiff with frost, but it had kept lungs just a little safer. The body itself was pressed into service. Peasants huddled tightly, their warmth mingling until the air between them grew just bearable. Infants nestled against mothers, elders wrapped in cloaks at the center of the group. It was not comfort, but it was life, a choreography of survival where even the smallest movements mattered. If warmth from outside was scarce, peasants sought to kindle it within. Heavy, dense meals were eaten at night, not for luxury, but for endurance. Root vegetables simmered into thick stews, grains boiled into porridge, coarse bread torn and dipped into broth. On fortunate days, scraps of pork or salted fish enriched the pot. The act of eating was an act of fueling the body's furnace. Children were urged to swallow every bite, for hunger meant shivering, and shivering meant danger. Fatty foods, slow to digest, were prized for the long, steady warmth they provided through the night. Sometimes this led to restless dreams, strange visions stirred by a stomach working overtime. But peasants accepted the trade. Better uneasy sleep than a cold body failing before dawn. Peasant ingenuity did not stop at food or fire. They invented small tools of comfort that seem strikingly clever even today. Heated stones were one such treasure. A flat rock, roasted in the hearth until glowing with warmth, was wrapped in cloth and placed beneath bedding. For a few hours, it radiated a gentle heat, warding off the frost creeping from the earth below. The hay box, too, served more than one purpose. Originally a way to keep cooked food warm, it doubled as a primitive insulator. Wrapped pots stayed hot for hours, while warm stones hidden beneath hay could transform a bed of straw into something almost comfortable. Risk was part of the practice. Wrap a stone poorly, and the bedding could smolder. Handle it carelessly, and burns were real. Yet these risks were taken willingly. A few hours of warmth were worth it. In the harsh arithmetic of winter, every small degree counted. Beyond fire and food, there was prayer. Faith was woven into every act of survival. Families knelt by the hearth, whispering petitions to saints for protection against the cold. Holy water sprinkled at doorways was thought to keep drafts, or spirits, from entering. Charms hung above beds, small talismans against unseen forces. For many this faith was not abstract but immediate. If a fire survived the night, it was thanks not only to ash and ember, but to divine mercy. If a child awoke with breath in their lungs, it was a blessing. Hope itself became a form of warmth, a light no frost could extinguish. Winter was never endured alone. Villages acted as networks of survival. Neighbors checked one another's fires, sharing glowing coals if a hearth went cold. Food was pooled when shortages struck. Children carried messages across snowbound fields, calling for aid when sickness or hunger threatened a family. Conflicts existed, of course, quarrels over land animals or debts, but when storms howled, even feuds quieted. Everyone knew that today's rival might be tomorrow's rescuer. Solidarity was not a virtue, it was necessity. Stories were told of neighbors who froze because no one came to check, of families lost when snow collapsed a roof. Such tales haunted the village, reminders that survival was collective. The bonds of community were as vital as straw, fire, or food. Despite every effort, winter claimed lives. Infants failed to survive long nights. Elders weakened, their breath fading quietly in the dark. Sometimes entire households perished, discovered in spring still huddled together as though trying to share warmth in their final moments. Frostbite scarred survivors, leaving missing fingers or toes as grim tokens of endurance. Disease spread easily in the smoky, crowded homes. A cough in December could become a funeral in January. Death was accepted not as shock, but as certainty. Each winter carried its toll. Each spring began with grief. Yet still, life pressed on. Each ember rekindled, each meal shared, each child bundled into wool was an act of defiance, a refusal to yield to the season's cruelty. Looking back now, it is easy to see only misery. The cold floors, the smoky air, the scratch of straw, the endless gnaw of hunger. And yet, beneath these hardships lies something remarkable. Resilience. Peasants did not crumble. They adapted. They invented ways to hold back the dark. They turned filth into insulation, turned animals into housemates, turned neighbors into lifelines. They found warmth in bodies pressed together, in bowls of stew, in whispered prayers, in the fragile glow of a banked fire. And through it all, they endured. Year after year, winter after winter, they emerged again into spring, scarred, weary, but alive. Tonight, as you lie in a soft bed beneath warm blankets, remember those who came before. The peasants who faced nights colder than we can imagine, armed with nothing but straw, fire, animals, and one another. Their lives remind us that survival is not always grand or glorious. Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is stubborn, sometimes it is as simple as sharing warmth, one ember, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. And as you drift into sleep, let their endurance steady your thoughts. For if they could face such nights and wake to see the sun again, then surely here and now you are safe, warm, and ready to rest until morning.